The sun beat down on Dust Devil Gulch, baking the already parched earth to a crisp. A lone hawk circled lazily overhead, its shadow a fleeting coolness on the bustling street below. Today was a day unlike any other in Dust Devil Gulch. Today was Evangeline's wedding day. Evangeline, a woman known for her fiery spirit and unwavering resolve, hummed a cheerful tune as she made the final adjustments to her dress. It was a vision of white lace and delicate embroidery, a stark contrast to the rugged landscape surrounding her. She had painstakingly sewn each pearl, each bead, dreaming of this day for what felt like forever. Her small cottage was filled with the sweet scent of wildflowers gathered by her friends that morning. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the hopeful gleam in her eyes. She pictured Bartholomew, her soon-to-be husband, waiting for her at the altar. A respected man, a pillar of the community. Or so she thought. A smile played on her lips as she fastened the final button. Today, Evangeline wasn't just marrying a man. She was marrying a future, a life filled with love and promise. She glanced at her reflection, a vision of radiant joy. Little did she know, that joy was about to be shattered into a million pieces, leaving behind a burning ember of fury and a thirst for retribution that would shake Dust Devil Gulch to its very core. Her hands trembled, not with pre-wedding jitters, but with anticipation for the life she was about to begin. The church bells began to toll, their sound echoing through the town, signaling the start of the ceremony. Folks poured into the small, wooden church, their Sunday best slightly rumpled from the heat. Excitement hung in the air, thick and sweet like the peach cobbler Mrs. Henderson had promised to bring to the reception. Bartholomew was, on the surface, a good catch. He owned the general store, providing the town with everything from flour to fabric. He was known for his calm demeanor and his willingness to lend a helping hand. The townsfolk saw him as a steady influence, a man of integrity. But beneath the surface, Bartholomew harbored a secret, a weakness that would soon be exposed for all to see. Even the saloon owner, a gruff man named Jebediah, sported a freshly pressed shirt. He even refrained from spitting on the floor, mostly. The children, usually rambunctious and full of mischief, were unusually quiet, their eyes wide with anticipation. This wedding was more than just a union of two people. It was a symbol of hope and stability in a harsh and unforgiving land. Everyone loved Evangeline, and she was marrying what seemed to be the best man in town. It seemed as if nothing could go wrong. Evangeline walked down the aisle, her smile as bright as the desert sun. Her father, his eyes brimming with pride, walked beside her. All eyes were on her, a vision in white against the backdrop of the simple church. She saw Bartholomew standing at the altar, his back stiff, his face pale. Something was wrong. As she reached the altar, the preacher began the ceremony. But before he could finish the opening prayer, Bartholomew cleared his throat, his voice trembling. I can't do this." A collective gasp swept through the church. Evangeline's smile faltered, her heart pounding in her chest. "Bartholomew, what are you saying?" He avoided her gaze, his eyes darting nervously around the room. I'm in love with someone else," he stammered. Then, with a speed that belied his usual composure, he grabbed a young woman standing near the back, Mayor Thompson's daughter, Clara, who blushed scarlet, and bolted out of the church, leaving Evangeline standing alone, utterly humiliated. The whispers started immediately, a buzzing swarm of disbelief and shock. The wedding, the symbol of hope, was shattered, replaced by the bitter taste of betrayal. The hawk circling above seemed to mock her pain with its lonely cry. A wave of nausea washed over Evangeline, but she refused to buckle. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them back, stealing her gaze. The initial shock began to recede, replaced by a cold, burning anger. She would not be pitied. She would not be seen as a broken woman. She took a deep breath, the air filling her lungs with a renewed sense of purpose. Her father rushed to her side, his face etched with concern, but she gently pushed him away. This was her battle, and she would face it head-on. The whispers continued, louder now, fueled by speculation and gossip. Some clucked their tongues in sympathy, while others whispered about what Evangeline must have done to drive Bartholomew away. But Evangeline paid them no mind. A plan was forming in her mind, a way to reclaim her dignity and exact her revenge. She straightened her shoulders, her eyes blazing with newfound resolve. The wedding dress, once a symbol of hope and love, now felt like armor. She would use it. She would use it to show Bartholomew and the entire town that Evangeline was not to be trifled with. The heartbreak was still there, a dull ache in her chest, but it was overshadowed by a fierce determination. She would rise from the ashes of this humiliation, stronger and more defiant than ever before. Evangeline marched out of the church, her head held high. The townsfolk parted like the Red Sea, their whispers dying down as she passed. She walked straight to the center of town, the dusty street her stage. She stopped in front of the saloon, the most public place in Dust Devil Gulch, and took a deep breath. "Bartholomew!" she shouted, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "Bartholomew, you coward! I challenge you to a duel." A hush fell over the town. The saloon doors swung open, and faces peered out, their expressions a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. Even Jebediah, the saloon owner, paused in his perpetual polishing of glasses. "High noon tomorrow," Evangeline continued, her voice unwavering. "In the town square. Pistols at 20 paces. And Bartholomew," she added, her voice dripping with scorn, "don't think you can hide. Everyone in this town will be watching." She paused, letting her words sink in. Then, with a final defiant glare, she turned and walked away, the white of her wedding dress a stark contrast against the dusty landscape. The challenge was made. The gauntlet was thrown. Now, all that was left was to wait and see if Bartholomew had the courage to face her, or if he would continue to prove himself the coward she now knew him to be. The town buzzed with anticipation. Something big was about to happen. The news of Evangeline's challenge spread like wildfire through Dust Devil Gulch. Opinions were divided. Some, mostly the women, admired her courage. "Good for her," they'd say, clucking their tongues and shaking their heads at Bartholomew's cowardice. They whispered about how he always seemed a bit too meek, a bit too eager to please. Others, mostly the men, thought she had gone mad. A duel? In a wedding dress? That's just not proper, they grumbled, stroking their beards and shaking their heads. They worried about the reputation of the town, about what outsiders would think. Bartholomew, meanwhile, was in a state of utter panic. He barricaded himself inside his general store. The windows shuttered, the door locked. He knew he was no gunslinger. He'd barely held a pistol in his life. The thought of facing Evangeline, even in her wedding dress, filled him with terror. He considered fleeing town, but he knew that would only make things worse. He was trapped, caught between his cowardice and the expectations of a town that had once respected him. He knew that declining would mean losing all respect and business. Clara, too, was starting to regret her decision. The thrill of the forbidden romance was quickly fading, replaced by the harsh reality of Bartholomew's predicament and the wrath of a jilted woman. While Bartholomew cowered in his store, Evangeline sought out Old Man Hemlock. Hemlock was a grizzled old gunslinger, a legend in these parts, though he mostly kept to himself these days, living in a small cabin up in the hills. He was rumored to be the fastest draw in the West, though he hadn't strapped on a gun in years. Evangeline found him sitting on his porch, whittling a piece of wood. She explained her situation, her voice tight with determination. Hemlock listened patiently, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "So, the little bride wants to learn how to shoot," he said, a hint of a smile on his lips. "I haven't taught anyone to shoot in 20 years. I'm not asking you to fight for me," Evangeline said, her chin held high. "I'm asking you to teach me how to fight for myself." Hemlock studied her for a long moment, his gaze piercing. He saw the fire in her eyes, the unwavering resolve. He saw a strength that reminded him of himself in his younger days. "All right, little bride," he said, finally, "let's see what you've got." He stood up, his joints creaking, and gestured toward a dusty old pistol lying on a nearby table. First lesson, never underestimate your opponent. The next morning, the hills echoed with the sound of gunfire. Hemlock put Evangeline through her paces. He showed her how to hold the pistol, how to aim, how to control her breathing. He taught her about the wind, about the distance, about the importance of staying calm under pressure. At first, Evangeline struggled. The pistol felt heavy in her hand, the recoil jarring. But Hemlock was patient, pushing her, encouraging her. He told her stories of his own duels, of his own triumphs and failures. He spoke of the importance of honor, of standing up for what you believe in. Slowly, Evangeline began to improve. Her shots became more accurate, her movements more fluid. She learned to anticipate the recoil, to control her breathing. She even managed to draw and fire with surprising speed. Hemlock nodded in approval. "You've got a natural talent, girl," he said, "but talent ain't enough. You need grit. You need heart." Evangeline practiced relentlessly, her wedding dress getting increasingly dusty and torn. She didn't care. The dress was no longer a symbol of lost love. It was a symbol of her newfound strength. With each shot, with each successful hit, she felt her confidence growing, her fear receding. By the end of the day, Evangeline was a different woman. She was no longer just a jilted bride. She was a gunslinger, ready to face her tormentor. Inside the barricaded general store, Bartholomew was a wreck. He paced back and forth, wringing his hands, his face pale and sweaty. He tried to convince Clara to run away with him, but she refused, her initial infatuation replaced by a growing disdain for his cowardice. He considered hiring someone to fight in his place, but he knew that Evangeline would see through the ruse immediately, and the town would never forgive him. He even thought about faking his own death, but he couldn't figure out a way to pull it off without getting caught. Desperate, he even begged Mayor Thompson to intervene, to call off the duel. But the mayor, though sympathetic to his daughter's plight, refused to get involved. "You made your bed, Bartholomew," he said sternly. "Now you have to lie in it." As the hours ticked by, Bartholomew's panic intensified. He knew that high noon was fast approaching, and he was running out of options. He was trapped, a prisoner of his own cowardice, facing a fate he desperately wanted to avoid. He wished he could turn back time, undo his mistake, but it was too late. The duel was set, the town was watching, and Evangeline was coming for him. He felt a deep sense of dread. His life was about to change forever. The sun climbed higher in the sky, its heat intensifying. High noon. The town square was packed, every window and rooftop filled with onlookers. A tense silence hung in the air, broken only by the occasional nervous cough or the creak of leather. Bartholomew emerged from his store, his face ashen, his hands trembling. He looked small and pathetic, a stark contrast to the man he had once been. He walked slowly towards the center of the square, his eyes darting nervously around the crowd. Then Evangeline appeared. She walked with a confident stride, her wedding dress dusty but still radiating a defiant elegance. Her eyes were fixed on Bartholomew, her expression unreadable. She stood tall, her shoulders squared, radiating an aura of unwavering determination. The crowd gasped. She looked like an avenging angel, a force to be reckoned with. Even Jebediah, the saloon owner, removed his hat in a gesture of respect. The stage was set. The duel was about to begin. The air crackled with anticipation. The sun beat down on the two figures, highlighting the stark contrast between their demeanors. One radiating fear, the other steely resolve. The silence stretched, taut and unbearable. A tumbleweed rolled lazily across the square. Then, a signal from Jebediah, acting as a reluctant referee, draw. Bartholomew fumbled with his pistol, his hand shaking so violently that he almost dropped it. He finally managed to raise it, but his aim was wildly off. He fired a shot, the bullet kicking up dust several feet away from Evangeline. Evangeline, in contrast, drew her pistol with a smooth, practiced motion. Her eyes narrowed, her focus absolute. She took aim, her breathing steady. She fired. The bullet whizzed through the air, striking Bartholomew's pistol, sending it flying from his hand. He yelped, clutching his now-numb fingers. He hadn't even seen it coming. It was as if she knew exactly where he was going to shoot before he did. He looked at Evangeline, his face a mask of terror. He knew he was outmatched. He had been a fool to think he could stand against her. He was completely inept, just as she had anticipated. The crowd murmured, impressed by Evangeline's skill and Bartholomew's utter lack thereof. The duel was far from over, but the outcome seemed inevitable. Bartholomew stood there, disarmed and defeated. Evangeline lowered her pistol, her gaze unwavering. She could easily kill him. She had the skill, the opportunity, and the justification. But as she looked at him, she saw not a monster, but a pathetic, cowardly man. "Pick it up," she said, her voice cold and hard. Bartholomew hesitated, then slowly bent down and retrieved his pistol. "Now get out of here," Evangeline said. "Get out of Dust Devil Gulch, and don't ever come back." Bartholomew didn't need to be told twice. He turned and ran, disappearing down the street, Clara nowhere to be seen. The crowd watched him go, their expressions a mixture of relief and disappointment. They had come to see a showdown, but they had witnessed something far more profound, a woman reclaiming her power. Evangeline stood there, alone in the center of the square, her wedding dress a symbol of her triumph. She had not sought to kill Bartholomew, but to humiliate him, to show him, and the entire town, that she was not to be trifled with. And she had succeeded. She had won. But what cost? The townsfolk slowly dispersed, their conversations hushed and respectful. They knew they had witnessed something extraordinary, something that would be talked about in Dust Devil Gulch for years to come. Evangeline walked back to her cottage, the wedding dress dragging in the dust. She entered the small house, the scent of wildflowers still lingering in the air, a bittersweet reminder of what could have been. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, her face streaked with dirt and tears. She was no longer the innocent bride who had stood before that mirror just yesterday. She was a survivor, a warrior. She knew that Bartholomew would face the consequences of his actions wherever he went. He would be a pariah, a laughingstock. He would never be able to escape the shame of what he had done. That was his punishment. As for Evangeline, she had a new life to build. She had proven her strength, her resilience. She had shown the world that she was not to be underestimated. She had reclaimed her dignity, and that was all that mattered. She had faced her heartbreak and had won. Now it was time to move on and rebuild her life. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in days, Evangeline felt a glimmer of hope. A few days later, Evangeline stood at the edge of town, a small bag packed with her belongings slung over her shoulder. She wore simple clothes, her wedding dress folded neatly in the bag. She looked back at Dust Devil Gulch, a ghost of smile on her lips. She had proven her point. She had shown them all that she was not to be pitied, not to be underestimated. She had faced her demons and emerged victorious. Now it was time to move on, to find a new beginning. She mounted her horse, a sturdy mare named Bess, and turned her towards the setting sun. She wasn't seeking revenge anymore. She was seeking freedom, independence, a chance to build a life on her own terms. As she rode away, she could feel the eyes of the townspeople on her. They would remember her, the bride who had challenged her groom to a duel, the woman who had dared to defy convention. They would be changed by her actions, inspired by her courage. Dust Devil Gulch would never be the same, and neither would Evangeline. She rode into the sunset, a lone figure against the vast expanse of the western landscape, ready to face whatever the future held. Her wedding dress, a reminder of her past, was now a symbol of her strength, her resilience, her unwavering spirit. The end.